Rain tapped against the glass of a quiet Manhattan cafe, blurring the city lights into gray streaks. Late that night, Claire Whitaker came to sign a few papers and end a marriage that had already taken too much from her. She expected pain. She expected humiliation. She did not expect to leave with a choice more complicated than freedom. For 3 years, she had lived with a husband who looked gentle in public and became someone else behind closed doors. Danger did not always shout. Sometimes it smiled, spoke softly, and made you question your own fear. The stranger who stepped in that morning was no saint. He was dangerous, too. But he was the first man in years who made Claire feel safe. On the table beside her untouched coffee lay a manila folder holding 12 pages of legal paperwork, a formal and heartless surrender. Her lawyer had called it a clean break. But Claire knew better. There was no clean way to cut 3 years of marriage out of your life. She had chosen the crowded cafe on West 54th Street because she wanted witnesses. Noise, people. A barista close enough to hear if her voice broke. Once, she had wondered if she was being paranoid. That ended 18 months earlier, when Damon had punched a hole in the wall beside her head. At exactly 11:04, the bell above the door rang. Damon Vale stepped inside, bringing the storm with him. He was handsome in a way that felt almost manufactured. Tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a tailored suit. Damon carried himself like a man who expected every room to make space for him. His face was polished, symmetrical, designed to invite trust he had never earned. For 3 years, Claire had watched him charm strangers while hiding the rot underneath. His eyes searched the cafe and found her. Then came the warm smile, smooth and practiced. He crossed the room as if nothing between them had ever been broken. Damon pulled out the chair without asking and sat down with the cold confidence of a man who had never believed the word no applied to him. "You look tired," he said softly, his voice full of the false concern she had learned to hate. Claire did not flinch. She slid the folder across the table and told him everything was ready to sign. He did not even glance at the papers. Instead, he lifted her untouched coffee, held it for a moment, then set it back down. Anyone watching would have missed it. Claire did not. He was reminding her that he still believed he could touch anything that belonged to her. When he began talking about their marriage, she looked him straight in the eye and told him she wanted them to become strangers. For 1 second, his smile disappeared. She could read his moods the way some people read weather. A shift in posture. A pause held a little too long. When he casually mentioned her friend Marta, and then recited her exact address on 86th Street. Claire went cold. It was his favorite method. A threat wrapped in politeness. Soft enough to leave no proof and sharp enough to cut. Still, she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She pressed her palm flat against the folder so he could see her hand was steady. "Sign the papers." "Damon," she said. He leaned back, smiling wider now, and began listing all the things he intended to take from her. Damon said his legal team had been far too generous, and nothing would be official until he decided it was. Then he went after her work. He spoke of her restoration projects, dropping names like Calloway and Mercier, with the quiet promise that he could ruin them for her. Around them, the cafe kept moving. Machines hissed. Cups clattered. People laughed at their phones, unaware of the violence unfolding at the corner table. Claire pulled a small recorder from her bag and set it beside the sugar bowl. "Then speak clearly," she said. Damon's smile tightened. He leaned in and mentioned the private investigator, the photographs, and how easy it would be to call Calloway's wife. Under the table, her hands turned ice cold. Her chest tightened until every breath felt thin. All the careful advice from her lawyer about staying calm vanished when Damon leaned in and began whispering in rapid Italian. Claire's college Italian caught only fragments, but they were enough. Break lines. Marta's name. Something about making someone suffer slowly. She forced herself not to look away. One shaking finger slid the recorder closer to him, hidden by the folder's edge. Legal papers suddenly felt useless against a man who had decided rules were only for other people. Claire sat there, staring into a darkness no courtroom could fully reach. The color drained from Claire's face as she understood the trap. This meeting had never been about settlement papers. It was about getting her alone in public. Close enough for him to torture her, while everyone around them remained politely unaware. Damon was skilled at hidden cruelty. His words stayed low. His smile stayed calm, and her legs felt too heavy to move. Claire's thumb hovered over her phone beneath the table, ready to send Marta a warning. Then a voice came from her left. It was not loud, but it carried enough weight to cut through the room. Claire looked up and saw a stranger standing a few feet away, stepping out from behind a concrete pillar. The man stood tall, a dark shape against the rain-dulled window. His face was worn and uneven, nothing like Damon's polished beauty. But he had a presence that filled the space around him. He looked straight at Damon, barely acknowledging Claire, studying him like a wolf studies prey. In a calm, even voice, he began naming Damon's secrets, the plan to tamper with Claire's brakes, the men watching Marta's apartment on 86th Street, the account used to pay them. Claire saw Damon's fingers stop moving on the table. The stranger's words were quiet, yet the people at the next tables fell still. The coffee machine kept hissing behind them, and traffic hummed beyond the glass. But their corner of the cafe went silent. Damon looked up at the stranger, the color slipping from his face. Claire had seen him angry, charming and cruel. She'd never seen him small. Now inside his expensive wool coat, he looked powerless. "I do not know who you are," Damon whispered, his smooth voice gone, replaced by the sound of a gambler realizing he had no cards left. "No," the stranger said without moving. "You do not." Claire kept her hand on the recorder and watched Damon understand that someone else in the room knew how to hunt. Damon gave Claire one last hateful look before pushing back his chair. He reached for the manila folder, and Claire stopped breathing. If he took those papers, the nightmare would continue. She moved first, sliding the folder under her forearm. Her voice came out low but clear. "They stay with me." Damon paused, his jaw working, then dropped his hand and buttoned his jacket with shaking, stubborn fingers. He walked out, the bell above the door chiming softly behind him. Claire finally released the edge of the table. Her grip had left red marks in her skin. "He will not let this go," the stranger said. "No," she whispered. "He has already started." The stranger's voice remained steady as he laid out the facts with almost clinical calm. Damon's threats were real. Men were already watching Marta's apartment and tracking Claire's movements. Claire stared at him, feeling the weight of his dark, unwavering gaze. "How long were you sitting there?" she asked. "Long enough," he replied. He said he did not usually involve himself in business disputes, but a threat of physical harm changed the matter. Claire reached for her phone, texted Marta one word, "Leave," then looked back at him. Her hands were still shaking, but her mind had begun to clear. She was frightened. She was not finished. He reached into his dark coat with slow, measured movements and placed a heavy embossed card on the table. Adriano Moretti. No logo, just a name and a number. "If it escalates, call," he said, his voice rough and low. He left $300 bills on the table, abandoned his half-finished espresso, and disappeared into the rain with the quiet grace of a predator. Claire sat there for nearly an hour. At last, with a trembling hand, she signed the divorce papers, took a photo of every page, and emailed them to Rachel before doubt could stop her. Looking at the card, she knew she had just stepped from one danger into another. Outside, the rain fell in hard, relentless sheets. Later, behind the deadbolts of Marta's Upper West Side apartment, Claire told her everything: the stalker, the brake lines, the threats, and the stranger named Adriano Moretti. Marta did not hesitate. "Call him," she said. "You did not truly know your husband either, and you gave him years." Claire wanted to argue, but her phone lit up with a blocked number and 3 silent calls in a row. That night, her sleep broke into pieces, full of cold dreams and sharp images. By morning, she finally dialed the number. It rang twice. A deep voice answered with only his last name. Moretti. When Claire spoke, The silence on the line told her he knew exactly who she was. I know who you are, he said quietly. She asked what he meant by helping her, but he insisted some things had to be discussed face to face. He gave her an address on East 67th Street. Claire arrived 15 minutes early, circling the block once before approaching his massive 8-story limestone townhouse. Built in the late 19th century, it was beautiful and neglected, its carved details fading under years of disregard. She paused across the street, photographed the facade, and sent the location to Marta before ringing the bell. She studied the arched windows and weathered stone urns where wild ivy had been allowed to grow unchecked. Lights glowed faintly upstairs, but the townhouse still looked like a treasure left too long in the dark. At exactly 1:47 in the afternoon, she rang the heavy brass bell. A stern, silver-haired woman opened the door, her sharp eyes measuring Claire in an instant. "Miss Whitaker," she said, and led her inside. The interior stopped Claire where she stood. As a restoration architect, she had spent her life searching for structural truth beneath damage and decay. Even afraid, she noticed what neglect had hidden. Claire had entered hundreds of wounded buildings and learned to read neglected stone like a private language. But this house carried a deeper ruin. Pale sunlight slipped through dusty windows, casting hard shadows across cracked marble floors. Above her, plaster medallions clung to the ceiling, and chandeliers hung wrapped in plastic. She saw water damage near the cornice, bad wiring near the east wall, and a staircase that deserved better than dust. The place was wounded, but not dead, lost in the stillness of the hall. Claire did not realize she was being watched. Adriano Moretti stood in the shadows, unreadable. "You are early," he said. "I am always early," Claire replied, pulling her gaze down from the ceiling. "Your building is extraordinary, and a disaster." She glanced up again. "Those two things can both be true. Is the plaster original? There was a terrible mid-century restoration here." Then she stopped. The memory of Damon flashed through her mind, sharp and unwelcome. Why was she analyzing plaster when her life was in danger? "Sorry," she whispered, force of habit. Adriano stepped back, his dark eyes calm. "Do not apologize," he said. "It is the first honest thing anyone has said about this house in years." Then he led her into a library that smelled of sawdust, old paper, and secrets. In the harsh afternoon light, Adriano looked different than he had in the dim cafe. The shadows revealed deep lines around his eyes, tension in his jaw, and a faint scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline. He looked like a man shaped by hardship, not comfort. And Claire had learned that comfortable people rarely understood real danger. "Sit down," he murmured, gesturing toward the leather chairs near a cold fireplace, dusted with ash. She remained standing for a moment first. "Tell me why you were in that cafe." A flicker crossed his face, then he sat across from her, silent and deliberate. "I will tell you what I know. They have been tracking your movements for 3 months, Adriano said calmly. "I found out 6 weeks ago." A familiar dread settled in Claire's chest. He spoke as if discussing a business matter, but she could feel the dangerous world behind his silence. He listed what they knew: her schedule, her office, her home on 86th Street, and the people she saw regularly. The realization of how exposed she was landed like a blow. Claire forced herself to write the details down in the notebook she carried for site visits. "He has no right to do this," she whispered. "No," Adriano said. "He does not." Claire looked up. "And what do you want from me?" "You are not doing this out of kindness alone," Claire said, her voice unsteady. Adriano looked at her with a gaze that was heavy, careful and analytical. "This building needs a restoration architect," he said. "I have rejected 11 firms. Yours has been on my list for some time." He was offering her a major contract. 8 stories, 18 rooms, and an open timeline. Claire stared at him, her pulse racing. "You just told me my ex-husband is tracking me, and your solution is for me to work here." "Yes," he replied, "because here I can see the doors." She held his gaze. "And because you need something restored, for the first time." He did not answer. "I also think working from a secured base with private drivers would solve your immediate problem." Adriano said. Claire sat in silence, letting the words settle. 3 years married to Damon Vale had burned away any remaining innocence. She knew Adriano belonged to a dangerous hidden world. Still, she remembered Damon whispering about brake lines over coffee, and the way police had dismissed her 18 months earlier. She opened her notebook and drew a line down the page. My terms, she said. Full access to the building. Written contract. Payment through escrow. And no decisions about my safety without telling me. Adriano studied her, then gave one slow nod. I would need to see the full scope of the building, Claire said, her voice cutting through the dusty library air. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her leather bag. She demanded access to every floor, every original blueprint, and every competing bid. Adriano stood still, a dark figure in the fading light, and accepted her terms with another slow nod. When she said she needed 24 hours to decide, he rose with her in a gesture of old-world respect. At the heavy oak door, she paused. What were you waiting for in the cafe? She asked. To see whether you wanted help, he said, and whether he deserved warning first. She left him with the weight of that answer pressing against her ribs. For the next 24 hours, she paced the worn floorboards of Marta's apartment. From the window, she kept watching the black utility vehicle parked below like a crouched animal. It felt like proof that Damon's surveillance had followed her there. Running would only stretch the chase. So Claire chose the risk she could measure and called Adriano to accept the contract. After a heavy 2-second silence, he agreed. On Thursday, she returned to the ruined townhouse with a camera, scanner, hard drive, and a plan. She was still afraid, but fear no longer got the only vote. For Claire, work had always been armor, a ritual that kept the world at a distance. For 6 hours, she moved through the townhouse with brisk purpose, photographing damage, labeling rooms, and marking the places that could become dangerous if ignored. Upstairs, faded silk wall coverings hinted at old elegance, while cracked marble still held its ground under dust. On the top floor, stripped down to its wooden studs, she found Adriano. He stood in the orange bleed of sunset, like a lonely king inside a ruined castle. Claire lifted her camera and took 3 photos before he noticed her. For the report, she said, he almost smiled. Without his tailored jacket, his rolled sleeves revealed parallel scars along his forearm, echoing the mark at his temple. His body carried the map of a violent past. He turned toward her in the gold of the dying day. When she warned him, the restoration would take 2 difficult years and cost an extraordinary amount of money, he only said, "Money is no obstacle." Claire did not let him hide behind that. "Money is always an obstacle if the client loses patience," she said. "I need commitment, not performance." His gaze sharpened. "Then you have commitment, in that dusty, stripped room." The knot in her chest loosened slightly. Then her phone buzzed with a photo of the black vehicle behind her car. Her fingers shook as she dialed his number from memory and read aloud the license plate of the vehicle behind her. His voice came back at once. Cold and certain, "I see it." The realization chilled her. She was being watched not only by her stalker, but by the man protecting her. Adriano directed her to a concrete parking garage on 44th Street and told her to wait in the dark. "No," Claire said, surprising herself. "I am not sitting blind. Tell me where your car is." A pause. Then he gave her the details for 7 long minutes. She kept the engine running and the exit in sight. Then a text appeared. "You are clear. The vehicle has been redirected." The word redirected stayed in her mind like a warning. She chose not to ask what kind of pressure had made the car disappear. Back in her apartment, she performed her nightly ritual. Deadbolt, chain, windows, shadows. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she stared at her phone and heard his voice again. What kind of man could track her on a highway without warning? And what kind of woman felt safer because he could? She opened her laptop. But instead of hiding in work, she wrote a list. What Adriano knew, what Damon had done, what she still had control over. The list was short, but it was hers. 14 blocks away, on the bare top floor of his decaying mansion, Adriano stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker like distant sparks. He thought of Claire, her steady hands as she signed the contract, the way she had challenged him when most people simply obeyed, her quiet reverence before the cracked plaster medallions. She was the first person in years to demand direct truth from him, the first to look past his scars and see the bones of his sanctuary. A chill moved through him when he imagined what might have happened had he been 20 minutes slower. He told himself this was business. The ache in his chest did not believe him. That night, sleep was impossible for both of them. For 4 days, Claire worked on her report, moving faster than the dust and decay seemed to allow. She found an 1890s butler pantry sealed behind a false wall and a narrow servant staircase nearly hidden by boards. The discovery gave the project a pulse, but she did not linger too long. Damon was still out there. She sent Adriano one photo of the ironwork with a single line. "Do not let anyone tear this out." His reply came 2 minutes later. "Never." Claire stared at the word longer than she should have, then went back to the evidence folder on her desk. By the second day, Claire understood that the house was a magnificent, tragic puzzle, the most compelling project of her career and a dangerous distraction from the life collapsing around her. Adriano Moretti moved through the halls like a quiet shadow. He knew how to share a room without taking all the air from it. He never hovered, never questioned her measurements. And when she asked, he answered plainly. On the 4th day, they sat in the dim library while her laptop cast pale light across his face. She walked him through the numbers. He listened without interruption, then asked 3 precise questions. It was the first time in years a man had listened without trying to own the answer. The full restoration, she told him, would fall somewhere between $4.2 and $5.8 million, and likely climb once the ancient walls were opened. Some clients, she explained, chose to leave utility spaces untouched. Adriano looked at her without blinking and said he wanted the entire building restored, even the forgotten servant staircase. When she gasped, he admitted he had watched her spend 40 minutes studying its ironwork the morning before. Her cheeks warmed as she closed the laptop, the faint clink of water glasses cutting through the air. "Then understand this," she said. "You do not get to save the beautiful rooms and abandon the hidden ones." He nodded, agreed. He had a quiet habit of handling small things himself, and now he slid a cool glass of water toward her, across the dark wood of the desk. Then his voice broke the silence. "The car that followed you on Thursday has been paid through the end of the month," he said, "but after that, your husband will find his surveillance contract nearly impossible to maintain." Claire froze. He had interfered with Damon, stepping into her private nightmare without permission. She knew she should protest, and this time she did. "You do not get to move pieces around my life without telling me," she said. His face remained calm, but his eyes darkened. "I know." She had practiced a fierce speech in the mirror that morning, and now she forced herself to use it. She asked about Marta, whose building was still being watched twice a day. "If that changes, you will be told," Adriano said. The water glass was cold in her hand, so she set it down. "No, I want to be told before you act. Not after." He did not deny it. He simply sat there, patient and without the defensive guilt she had grown used to seeing in men. When she asked why, his silence felt like a man deciding how much truth she could bear. "Because the situation required it," he said, "and because I was in a position to help." "That is not a complete answer," she murmured. "No," he agreed. "It is not." She let the silence remain. 11 days later, Claire moved into the townhouse. Officially, it was practical, a way to save 90 minutes of commuting. But she knew the truth. 3 days earlier, Damon had stood beneath her third-floor Brooklyn window at 11 at night, looking up, making sure she knew he could still reach her. Panicked, she had called Adriano's number. He answered on the first ring, and minutes later, Damon was gone. Claire had hated the relief that followed. She had hated needing it even more. She arrived on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and a folder marked evidence. Elena led her to a 4th-floor suite with the weary, knowing expression of someone who had seen this kind of trouble before. The room had old linen, real books, and a view of the overgrown garden below. Claire unpacked in 40 minutes, the habit of a woman always prepared to leave. Then she placed the evidence folder in the top drawer, locked it, and kept the key on a chain under her shirt. She was now living under the roof of a man she had known for less than 3 weeks, and she refused to pretend that did not scare her. She tried to push away the memory of Damon under her window and buried herself in work. Soon a rhythm formed. She woke at 7, and by 8, the contractors arrived. In the evenings, when the noise faded, she sometimes found a tray outside her door. Soup, tea, once a single orange already peeled into neat pieces. Adriano never mentioned it. She never thanked him out loud. But on the third night, she left his empty espresso cup on the library table with a note. Too much sugar. The next morning, the coffee came black. For some reason, that small correction made her feel safer than any guard outside. One night, Elena invited her to dinner, and Claire finally said yes. They ate by candlelight in the half-ruined dining room, surrounded by peeling plaster and scaffolding. Adriano did not ask empty questions. He listened as Claire spoke of history, and when she asked about the mansion, he told her it had belonged to his grandfather and to his father before him. "You care about this place," she murmured. "I neglected it," he said softly. "That is not the same thing." Claire looked at him across the candlelight and saw, for the first time, not a protector or a threat, but a man ashamed of what he had allowed to decay. "My family acquired it in 1923, Adriano said, watching the candle flame tremble in the draft. "Every Moretti neglected it, including me. Until recently, when Claire asked what had changed, he met her eyes. I decided I had neglected things long enough. This was about more than old brick and plaster, and both of them knew it. By the third week, Damon's attorney sent a letter reopening the asset division. In the cold library, Claire read 12 paragraphs of legal venom, demanding a financial review that could drag the divorce out for another 6 months. The familiar feeling of being trapped returned. This time, she did not fold the letter away. She read every line twice. A cold draft moved through the room as Claire realized Damon was escalating because he sensed her slipping out of reach. Adriano stood perfectly still while she read the paper. When he asked what her attorney thought, her voice sounded exhausted. Rachel called it a classic delay tactic. A slow fire meant to drain her until she surrendered. Damon wanted all 3 jointly owned properties. Claire pressed her fingertips to her eyes, then dropped her hand and reached for a pen. "Fine," she said. "Then we answer him with documents." Not fear outside. A pale September rain began to fall, turning the world gray. "There are other ways to handle this," Adriano said, his voice carrying a quiet, dangerous promise. Claire looked up sharply, clutching the legal paper as if it could anchor her. She knew what he was capable of, and she did not want details. She told him not to interfere. If she was going to survive this, it had to be on terms she could live with. A slight tightening in his jaw betrayed his anger after weeks of watching. His voice stayed flat as he gave her the facts. Damon was not stopping. He had been calling her clients privately, painting her as unstable and claiming she had run off with a dangerous criminal syndicate. The air seemed to drop in temperature. Adriano explained that Damon was questioning her professional integrity to her clients. Claire's body reacted before her mind did. She stood because sitting no longer left her enough air. When she realized Adriano had been monitoring communications since the day they met, she turned toward the window. Rain beat against the old glass. She felt violated and grateful at the same time, and the contradiction made her sick. Then she turned back. "Show me," she said. Adriano's eyes narrowed slightly. "All of it." He opened a locked drawer and took out a thin black file. Claire understood then that the truth was worse than a warning. "You should have told me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Adriano simply nodded, his eyes fixed on hers. He looked like a man prepared to pay for his choices, though not to regret them. When she demanded to know everything else he had hidden, a long silence stretched between them. Then he laid it out. surveillance teams, investigators hired to follow her, and the financial tracking he had ordered on Damon. Claire listened without speaking. The file contained dates, names, hotel receipts, photos, and payment trails. It was protection. Yes, it was also a private map of her life. She closed the folder with both hands. Her face went still as she tried to process the weight of what he had admitted. When he finished, she said he had been running a shadow operation around her life. Adriano called it managing a situation. Claire turned her back to him and looked out at the rain-soaked garden, trying to untangle anger from relief. I spent 3 years with a man who controlled me and called it protection, she whispered. She faced him again before he could answer. So listen carefully. If you hide information from me again, I leave this house. Contract or not. Guards or not. Her voice did not shake. That mattered. She told him she would never submit to that kind of control again. Behind her, Adriano shifted, and his usually flat voice carried a rare force. He argued that this was different. He had withheld information to protect her from immediate threats, not to take away her power. Claire turned and asked if he truly could not hear how much his excuses sounded like Damon's. Silence returned. His jaw tightened. Then, with painful honesty, he admitted that he could see it. They stood divided in the dim room, while the candles flickered in the draft. Claire slid the black file toward him. Then choose better, she said. Claire demanded to be part of every decision. She would not be handled. When Adriano quietly agreed, she believed him, because he was not a man who wasted words. Reclaiming her agency, she decided to call her client directly and confront Damon's lies herself. She was willing to lose properties, money, and comfort, but she would not let him break her name. Adriano told her it was the right path. She picked up the phone before fear could bargain with her. Marcus, she said when the call connected, there are things being said about me. I want you to hear the truth from my mouth first. After the call, Claire looked at Adriano and asked how many other battles he was fighting in silence. The answer was there in the pause, several, when she asked how he lived that way. He looked at her and said, "You find what is worth protecting. Then you protect it." A quiet alarm moved through her heart. She understood that she had become one of the things he had chosen to shield, and that his devotion was no longer just business. But she also understood something else. If she stayed, she would not be a rescued woman standing behind him. She would stand beside him. Or not at all. Claire had known a different kind of trust once. The desperate hope she had given Damon and mistaken for certainty. This was not that. Real trust was not a leap. It was evidence gathered slowly, by watching what someone did under pressure. From the window of her 4th-floor suite, she watched rain swallow the garden in gray. Marcus Calloway's voice on the phone had been direct and steady. He refused to believe Dominant's anonymous poison without speaking to her first. Claire knew she had to fight without holding back. She dialed Rachel next. "File the response," she said. "Give them everything, and send subpoenas for his client calls." 2 days after the filing, the storm finally broke. Claire was on the 3rd floor, trying to lose herself in plaster specifications, when a sudden change in the building's sound made her freeze. The contractor beside her fell silent. Down in the grand marble hall stood Damon. He had bypassed every security protocol like a ghost, and now stood beneath the dusty chandeliers, looking over her work with open contempt. 4 feet away stood Adriano Morti. Claire had seen him angry, but never like this. He was not shouting. He was terrifyingly still. Damon looked up and smiled when he saw Claire on the stairs. Adriano stood with his arms loose and his face emptied of warmth. The polite mask was gone, leaving something old, cold and predatory beneath it. From the shadowed staircase, Claire realized Damon had finally met the force he should have feared from the beginning. Damon's voice drifted upward, wrapped in the practiced negotiating tone he used to dominate rooms. He gestured toward the dust, trying to sound like the reasonable adult. But Adriano did not move. Claire gripped the cold railing, then forced herself down 2 steps. She would not hide above them like a frightened witness. Damon's eyes followed her, bright with hate. Then Adriano spoke. The words from below were barely more than a whisper, but they cut through the hall and stopped Damon mid-sentence. Silence filled the marble space. Damon looked up and found Claire on the stairs. There was no rage in his eyes, only a cold promise of future ruin, the kind that time would not soften. Claire met his stare and did not look away. Damon turned back to Adriano, and whatever he saw there made him button his jacket in a defensive motion. He walked out, slamming the heavy front door behind him. Elena closed the inner doors with a disapproving click, and slowly the sounds of construction returned. Claire peeled her cold fingers from the mahogany railing and forced herself down the stairs. Adriano stood motionless, staring at the closed door while his human mask slowly returned. "What did he say?" she demanded, using sharpness to hide her pounding heart. Adriano tried to spare her the worst of it, but she reminded him of their agreement. A true partnership could not survive on selective truth. He admitted Damon had threatened retaliation, boasting that no one controlled him. When she asked what Adriano had answered, a cold, humorless smile touched his mouth. "I told him he was welcome to try." Claire took out her phone and saved the time of the encounter. Damon's look had promised a slow, patient ruin. "He is not going to stop," Claire whispered. She had said the same thing once before in the library, but now it sounded final. "No," Adriano replied, his voice flat. "He is not." The hall smelled of rain and wet marble, while the covered chandeliers hung above them, like sleeping ghosts. "Then we stop waiting for his next move," Claire said. Adriano looked at her. "What happens next?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "He found something," Adriano said quietly, "about my history." The word history landed hard enough to change the air. "He is going to use it," Adriano said, and the air seemed to freeze. "What did he find?" Claire asked. Adriano was quiet for a long time, the silence heavy as stone. "Everything," he murmured, standing on the bottom step of the ruined staircase. Claire knew the storm coming toward them would be worse than anything she had survived so far. Still, she did not want to run. "Then tomorrow you tell me everything first," she said, "before he gets to use it." That night, sleep was impossible. Lying in bed, she traced the ceiling patterns in the dark while one word circled her mind: everything. Damon Vale had the wealth, patience and cruelty to dig up every secret Adriano Moretti had ever buried. Adriano had kept the worst of it from her, his face marked by the exhaustion of a man lowering a burden he had carried for years. Tomorrow, he had promised. "Let me make some calls tonight." Claire had agreed, but she did not wait helplessly. Before dawn, she made copies of her contract, her divorce filings, and every message Damon had sent. Her fingers still felt cold from the memory of him staring up at her like a hunter. At 6:45 the next morning, she found Adriano in the library. The room smelled of dark coffee and sleeplessness. The library held a dense, exhausted silence sharpened by the smell of paper and coffee. Adriano sat at the mahogany desk with his jacket off and sleeves rolled high. 3 thick stacks of documents lay before him. When he looked up, shadows under his eyes showed the cost of the night. "Sit down," he said, quiet but firm. Claire took the chair across from him and placed her own folder on the desk. Elena entered with 2 cups of black coffee and left as silently as someone who knew this conversation did not belong to her. Adriano stared into the dark liquid, then looked directly at Claire. "My family has been involved in organized crime in New York since 1931, he said evenly. "My great-grandfather started it. My grandfather expanded it. My father ran it until he died 12 years ago." Adriano continued. "I inherited it when I was 31. Claire gripped her coffee cup and said nothing. She had always known the truth in outline, but hearing it spoken plainly gave it a sharper, uglier shape. Adriano explained that his syndicate directly employed 40 people and hid its operations behind shipping, construction, and waste management. He watched her closely, looking for disgust. "Federal authorities have investigated me 4 times, he added. "I have never been charged. My lawyers are excellent, and witnesses do not cooperate." Claire did not blink. "Why? Why did no one cooperate?" Claire asked. needing to hear it. Because people understand the cost of speaking, Adriano said. And because for 12 years, I have managed every piece of evidence. Claire set down her cup. The porcelain clicked against the wood. Managed, she pressed. He leaned forward. I am not careless. I do not pull the triggers. Claire, but I have given orders that led to them. Legally, that keeps me free. Morally, it changes nothing. His voice held no self-pity. No illusion. Claire opened her folder and pushed a blank page toward him. Then write down every place Damon can hurt you. Adriano's eyes lifted. What did he find? She asked. The case involved bid rigging, payoffs, and 2 acts of arson. Adriano said. The building was empty. No one died. But the investigation collapsed when my witness vanished. Claire stared at the documents, her hands trembling. And Damon has this. Adriano nodded. He has the entire federal file. If it reaches the authorities or my rivals, my world changes overnight. Claire's breath caught. He wants you to stop protecting me. Adriano's jaw tightened. He wants more. He is offering a trade. He will drop the divorce litigation and end the surveillance if the file stays locked in his safe. Claire almost laughed. It came out hollow. He wants both of us obedient. In exchange, I disappear from your life completely, and my lawyers issue a statement that we have no relationship, Adriano said. The room seemed to shrink around Claire. He wants you to announce that I am no longer under your protection. The word protection hung between them like glass. It would leave you exposed, Adriano said. No shield against whatever he tries next. Claire felt the chill spread through her. Like the brake lines. She whispered. She stood abruptly and walked to the window, watching damp October roses fade in the gray morning. Then she turned back. No, she said. We are not accepting a deal built around my fear. He will destroy you, she whispered, her breath misting faintly against the cold window. If you refuse, he sends the file to the feds. Adriano stood behind her, close but not touching, a silent presence in the dim light. And if I accept, you are left alone with a man who knows only cruelty. Claire turned slowly. That is not a real choice. No, he agreed. In his dark eyes, she saw no fear for himself, only a fierce need to protect her. She walked back to the desk and picked up the federal file. Then we make a third choice, she said. We take away his leverage before he uses it. The file is a problem, but it is not fatal, Claire said. Sitting again beneath the heavy light of the library, she pressed her fingertips to her temples, thinking like an architect watching a structure fail. She saw the truth clearly. Adriano was afraid not of the file itself, but of what Damon would do to her if they accepted the deal. His quiet nod filled the room like lead. She thought of his 12 years of careful operations, his 40 employees, and the man who had calmly discussed cutting her brake lines over coffee. We need to know what is load-bearing and what is rotten, she said. Tell me about the fire. He paused, and for a moment the room seemed to carry the memory of smoke. Years earlier, a rival's warehouse had burned down. It had been ruled arson, and the trail led back to him. The competitor withdrew, and the contract went to Adriano's side. Claire kept her face still. Was anyone inside? She asked. No, he said. I made sure of it. Legally, the distinction mattered. Morally, it did not wash the stain away. Claire wrote arson. Empty building. Witness vanished. Her handwriting looked steadier than she felt. What does Damon want from me? She asked. The shadow of the library drapes fell across Claire's face, catching the slight tremor in her fingers. He wants a clean escape, Adriano said. No record of what he did. No financial scars. Everything cut loose on his terms. Across the mahogany desk, his jaw tightened, and his gaze carried the weight of a verdict. He wanted to stop. Claire had whispered. Even if she gave him everything, Damon would not let her go. No, Adriano said, his voice low. I do not believe he will. Claire looked at the list in front of her. Damon had spent months making her world smaller. Now she would make his lies smaller than the truth. This was the truth her lawyer avoided, and her therapist had tried to name before Claire stopped going. It had never been about real estate or money. It was about making sure that wherever she ran, Damon had already poisoned the ground beneath her. Claire had been surviving one day at a time, but now sitting in Adriano Moretti's library in the cold gray October light, she understood that survival was no longer enough. Her phone rang sharply, shattering the room. At 7:14 in the morning, Rachel Brenner's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was flat. "Claire, a piece is going live in an hour. It is about Adriano Moretti and his business." The article would describe her living situation and her professional connection to Adriano. Claire felt ice close around her chest. "What outlet?" she asked. When Rachel named it, the room seemed to lose its air. It was a respected financial journal, the kind New York's wealthy read over investor dinners. Claire knew who had fed them the story before she even asked. The details were too precise, taken from private records. Rachel paused, her voice heavy. "Claire, your name is in it. It calls you a contractor living with a known mob figure. It questions your judgment and suggests your clients should reconsider their ties." Claire closed her eyes once. "Send me the draft." "Bad enough that I am calling you at 7 in the morning," Rachel said. Claire ended the call and placed the phone on the desk with painful precision, only to keep her hands from shaking. Adriano's face had turned to stone. "He moved faster than I expected," Claire murmured. "He sent the files last night." Something dark passed behind Adriano's eyes. While they had been arguing in the hall, the fuse had already been lit. Damon had not come to negotiate. He had come to watch the ignition. "He played you," Claire whispered. Adriano's answer was cold and absolute. "Yes, he did." Claire picked up her phone again. "Then we move faster." The Callaway contract, the largest project of her career and the foundation of her next 3 years, was now under immediate review. Her other clients would read the articles soon and make their own calculations. For 15 years, Claire had built a reputation, then rebuilt it after a marriage in which Damon had worked constantly to undermine her. Now he meant to take a hammer to that foundation. "Can it be stopped?" she asked. "No, it is already formatted," Adriano said. "Once submitted, the outlet decides independently. I have a call out to someone with influence, but the timeline is bad. Then I need facts in front of my clients before the gossip reaches them." "Those calls are already in motion," Adriano replied. "I monitored them, but I did not intervene, as you requested." The words hung in the cold air. Claire had demanded independence, and Damon had used that opening. She stood and walked to the window, staring at the dead garden. For 1 second, regret almost swallowed her. Then her phone buzzed with a direct text from Marcus Callaway. "Heard something is coming out. Call me before 8. Marcus was 62, formal, and had trusted her after a portfolio review and 2 meetings. Now that trust was at risk, Claire inhaled once, saved the text, and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Claire," he said, careful and direct. "I am going to ask you something, and I expect a direct answer. Are you currently living with Adriano Moretti?" After a silent pause, Claire found her voice. "I am working from the building I have been contracted to restore," she said. "I have temporary residency there for the duration of the project." "Yes, and is Moretti connected to organized crime?" Claire looked across the room at Adriano. She could lie and buy herself a few hours. She chose not to. "Yes," she said. "And the project is legitimate. Both things are true." Marcus went silent. "I need you to tell me this is not what it appears to be," Marcus said. Claire thought of everything she could say. 15 years of work, discipline, and professional integrity. But Damon had built the trap too well. The calls, the article, the framing that would make any defense sound like a desperate lie. She could see how completely she had been caught. "Marcus," she said, keeping her voice level, "I need 24 hours. A long silence followed. "The piece will be out in under an hour." "I know," she said. "I am asking for 24 hours before you make any decision. I will bring you documents, answers, and my full report." 24 hours. Once the fuse was lit, it would burn on its own. Claire set down the phone and turned to Adriano. I need the absolute truth, she said. No softened version to protect my conscience. I need your exposure, your legal position, and exactly what Damon has. To survive the storm, she had to look directly into its center. Something shifted behind Adriano's dark eyes. A brief flash of vulnerability. That will be a long conversation, he warned. Then we had better start, she said. 40 minutes later, Elena's urgent knock broke the quiet. Her eyes were tight with dread. There is a man at the door. There is a man at the door, Elena whispered, her voice trembling. He has a badge. A federal warrant. In a single heartbeat. The room turned to ice. Claire watched Adriano's face close off. The careful man she had come to know vanishing behind steel. He rose in one smooth, imposing movement, and she saw the dangerous shadow of someone who had built an empire out of ash and force. Adriano calmly told Elena to show the agent in. This is Damon's work, he murmured, grabbing his jacket. The timing is too perfect. Claire picked up the folders from the desk and placed them in her bag. Then nothing disappears. We document everything. The air in the library grew suffocating. I need you upstairs, Adriano said, his voice low. Claire stood firm, refusing to hide like a ghost in someone else's house. I am not going. If federal agents were downstairs, she would not cower. In Adriano's eyes, something flickered. Not anger, but a man calculating the cost of her pride. Then stay here, he said, a command wrapped around a plea. Behind the closed door, she listened to the muffled, clinical voices in the hall. Damon had not merely leaked the truth. He had delivered it to the state. Claire opened her phone, began recording the time, and wrote down every voice she heard. The article was only a warning flare. The warrant was the machinery of ruin, built to tear Adriano's world apart. Damon had never wanted negotiation. He wanted total destruction. Claire pictured him buttoning his jacket in the hallway, a gesture she had mistaken for defeat. In truth, he had been watching the timer count down. For 11 long minutes. The muffled voices continued, steady and merciless. Claire kept writing. Agent count. Search scope. Records requested. When the front door finally clicked shut, Adriano returned. He stood in the doorway with every emotion buried beneath absolute control. His eyes dropped to the notes in her hand. Good, he said. They want 3 years of financial records, Adriano said, his voice flat. And I have 48 hours. Claire felt the room tilt beneath her feet. Is it survivable? She whispered. He looked at her, his dark eyes heavy with a sadness he did not try to explain. Legally, yes. Professionally, everything changes. He paused. Personally, that depends on decisions that are no longer mine to make. Claire looked around the library, at the dust, the files, the half-restored walls. She was no longer simply restoring an old building. She was standing inside the collapse of 2 lives. Then her phone buzzed, and the next blow arrived. The illusion of professional distance was gone. Over the past 6 weeks, Claire had stopped seeing the townhouse as just a workplace. Somewhere along the way, it had begun to feel like a home she had chosen. Then her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. An unknown number had sent no message, only a photograph of Marta's apartment on 86th Street, taken 40 minutes earlier. The glowing window said everything. I know where she is, and your protectors are busy. Claire stared at the screen as her blood turned cold. He is not done, she whispered, looking up at Adriano. The warrant was a distraction. He wanted your eyes somewhere else. She held up the glowing screen. Marta, she said, barely breathing the name. Adriano stared at the photo, and for the first time, his composure cracked, revealing a raw, frightening fury. He reached for his phone, but Claire was already moving. She understood then that waiting for someone to save you was not the same as being safe. Marta was her oldest friend, innocent of warrants, syndicates, and old crimes. Claire was finished being careful. She ignored Adriano calling her name, his voice sharp with the shock of a man unused to being disobeyed. In the hall, she grabbed her coat and sent Marta a voice message. Do not leave. Lock the door. I am coming. Adriano intercepted her at the front door, moving with a speed that startled her. He did not grab her. He simply became a wall. You cannot go out there alone, he said, his chest rising. Then come with me, she demanded. He told her his guards were tied up with the warrant. I need 60 seconds to redirect them. His control was beginning to strain. Claire checked the timestamp. You have 30. Adriano was already giving orders in rapid Italian, his voice low and commanding. It carried the authority of a man who had run an empire for 12 years and rarely needed to repeat himself. Claire used the seconds to forward the photo to Rachel. The car is coming around. We go together, Adriano said, leaving no room for debate. Claire did not argue, because deep down she did not want to face this alone. They slid into a dark sedan driven by a silent, broad-shouldered man from Adriano's inner circle. The doors slammed, and the car tore into morning traffic. Claire stared at her silent phone, calculating the minutes left. Marta always left for work at 8:15. Always early. Always predictable. It was 7:52. 23 minutes. Claire called Marta again. No answer. She called the building super. No answer. She clenched her jaw and refused to imagine why. 3 years of marriage had taught Claire to keep panic quiet, because Damon had always known how to use it against her. But as the sedan cut through the wet streets, terror took hold. Shallow breaths. Cold hands. The certainty that danger was already close. She asked what he wanted with Marta, though her heart already knew the answer. Adriano said this was a demonstration of power, a crude display of reach after 48 hours of failure. As the car ran a red light on 65th, Claire gripped the door handle and asked about the man who had taken the photo. Then she pulled up Marta's spare key instructions and sent them to Adriano's driver. Was there one man waiting in the shadows? Or two? Adriano's face glowed pale in the light from his phone as he explained that an army was unnecessary. This was not an abduction. It was a message. It required one visible act of malice. Enough to terrify Claire and prove that Damon could still move faster than she could respond. The sedan raced north on Columbus, each violent lane change vibrating through Claire's spine. She pictured Marta's third-floor walk-up with its faulty intercom and exposed fire escape. Brave, unprotected Marta had no idea what was coming. Claire texted again. Stay away from the windows. Claire looked down at the wet asphalt, her voice heavy with regret. I should have told Marta more. Adriano said she had only wanted to protect her from a terror she could not use. But Claire heard the echo at once. Damon had also managed information and called it care. Adriano gently corrected her. Damon had wanted captivity, while Claire had wanted protection. Before she could answer, the car reached 86th Street at 7:58. Her phone buzzed again, sharp and sickening. This time it was Marta. What is happening? Someone is downstairs. Claire's reply was immediate. Do not open. Move away from the door. I am outside. The media storm had broken. Rachel's voice was frantic on the phone, saying the story had gone live 2 minutes earlier and reporters were already circling. Claire cut her off. She could not engage with that now. Marta is threatened. Preserve the article and the timestamp, Claire said, then ended the call. The car pulled up half a block from Marta's building at 8:01. Claire shoved the phone away and stepped into the biting air beside Adriano. Years of survival had trained her eyes to search for anything wrong. Across the street, half hidden by the skeletal scaffolding of a half-renovated brownstone, she saw him, a silent figure waiting in the shadows. He stood under the scaffolding in dark clothes, not simply waiting but occupying the space with cold professional patience. His eyes stayed fixed on Marta's entrance, a phone in his hand. Claire pointed him out, her voice barely audible. Adriano did not hesitate. Without running, he and his driver crossed 86th Street with the calm, frightening purpose of men who had known violence before. Claire stood frozen for 4 seconds before turning toward the building entrance herself. She knew the door code by heart. She did not wait for permission. Her hands shook. But the numbers came back to her body before her mind could fail. The keypad felt icy beneath Claire's trembling fingers as she punched in the old code and slipped inside before the door clicked shut. She hurried up to the 3rd floor. Each step an attempt to outrun the panic clawing at her throat. Beneath her boots, the frayed burgundy carpet and tarnished brass tacks seemed to belong to another life, one before the shadows caught up. Marta opened the door in exactly 12 seconds, already dressed, her eyes wide with a silent understanding. Claire stepped inside, locked the door behind her, and pushed the chain into place. "Pack your medicine, your laptop, and nothing else," she said. Claire shut the door and told Marta to cancel her morning plans. Marta did not argue. She studied Claire with the knowing eyes of a true friend, then picked up the phone and cleared her day. From the third floor window, Claire watched the silent drama below. Adriano and his driver had trapped the watcher against the rusted scaffolding, their bodies forming a wall with no easy exit. After a sudden movement, the man handed over his phone. Claire filmed through a gap in the curtain, careful to keep the screen steady. 4 long minutes later, the watcher walked away without looking back. On the street, Adriano stood still and looked up at the weathered gray facade, toward the 3rd floor window. Behind the dust-filmed glass, Claire was only a pale silhouette. She raised her hand, knowing the glare probably hid her from view. He lifted the confiscated phone in answer. A silent signal, then headed inside. Behind her, Marta's sharp voice broke the spell. She wanted the truth. All of it. Claire turned to find her friend rigid on the couch, shoulders tense with protective anger. Claire did not soften it this time. "Damon used you to reach me," she said, "and I should have warned you before this." When Adriano entered the apartment, the air changed. He stood near the door with the seized phone in his hand while his driver guarded the hall. A heavy silence followed Claire's story. Marta stared at him, and Adriano met her judgment calmly. "You are the specialist," Marta said, "and you have been protecting her for 2 months." "Yes," he replied. Then Marta turned to Claire and asked if she loved him. The sudden heat in Claire's cheeks answered what she had denied through too many sleepless nights. Marta looked back at Adriano. "Am I a target now?" "No," he said quietly. "You were leverage. That leverage has been handled," Claire added. "And you are leaving with us." Adriano set the phone on the counter and explained that the photos were gone. "The watcher," he added, "had been strongly encouraged to find other work." Marta asked what strongly encouraged meant in his world. Adriano answered with chilling simplicity. It meant the man would wake up tomorrow, understanding that his life was worth more than this job. Marta set the device down and gave Claire the look she had used for 15 years. "You moved in with him," she said, slicing through Claire's weak explanations about construction work. "Does he know you love him?" The room fell silent, with only the distant hum of 86th Street beyond the glass. Outside, a city bus rumbled by and a dog barked. Ordinary sounds from a morning that had no idea how close tragedy had come. "We need to discuss what happens next," Claire said. "Damon is not finished. The article is live. And I have 22 hours left on my promise to Calloway. I need a real plan." As she spoke, Adriano's face shifted into cold operational focus. "Marta cannot stay here for the next 48 hours, he said. "That is not negotiable." Marta began to object, but Claire stopped her first. "He used you because of me," she said. "Please do not make me ask twice." Marta gave in because she understood the danger. Within an hour, she had packed and was in a car headed for a midtown address Adriano had arranged. Claire stood on the sidewalk and watched the vehicle disappear into the autumn cold. A strange quiet settled over her, the stillness that follows when a crisis turns into a list of hard tasks. Adriano stood beside her, silent but present, asking nothing. "What is the plan?" she asked. "Walk," he replied. "I think better when I am walking." They headed east on 86th Street through the morning rush, while Claire sent Rachel the video from the window. "Damon has fired every weapon he has," Adriano said. his voice low. The smear campaign. The pressure on your clients. The threat against Marta. He expected paralysis. He expected your career to collapse. He did not account for you. Claire looked down. I have nowhere left to go, she admitted. The article is live, and Calloway has 21 hours. If he holds, the others may hold. If he breaks, everything collapses. She thought of the townhouse on 67th Street, the marble floors, and the project she had refused to abandon. Then she stopped walking. I need to speak to Marcus in person, she said, and I need Damon's threats on record. She measured what she was willing to lose in the coming hours. I need to tell him the truth about who you are, what that building is, and why I am there. Adriano stopped near a flower stand where a vendor was arranging sunflowers. That truth may cost you the contract, he warned. I know, she said, holding his gaze. But the alternative is building the next 3 years of my life on a lie. I already spent 3 years building a marriage on illusions. I will not do it again. She took out her phone. And if Damon wants to make this public, I will not let him be the only one shaping the story. What Calloway does with the truth is his decision, Claire said. Adriano watched her with the quiet attention that had begun to feel like safe ground. All right, he said. I need you to let me do this without managing the outcome. She added, whatever he decides, let it stand. All right, Adriano said again, and something raw moved beneath his control. I know I have made it hard for you to trust me, he murmured, but when I agree to something, I keep my word. Full stop. Standing by the flowers. Claire thought of 3 years of promises used as weapons. Then keep this one, she said. She thought about how carefully she had learned to measure reality, comparing her old life with everything she had seen in Adriano. I know, she murmured, surprised by how much she believed him. From the car, they called Marcus Calloway and arranged a noon meeting. Back at the townhouse, Adriano spent 2 hours in the library with his attorney, while Claire went to the 4th-floor bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was tired, thinned by 2 months of adrenaline and sleepless nights. Still, something had changed. She no longer looked like a woman apologizing for existing. She looked like someone walking into a room with the truth in her hands. She smoothed the dark fabric of her trousers and adjusted her jacket, a sharp piece she had bought with her own money long before the marriage. It was armor, not vanity. Adriano stood in the dim library doorway, his gaze taking her in. You do not need anything else, he said. Claire lifted the folder she had prepared. I do, she replied. Evidence she walked the final 2 blocks alone, feeling the hard pavement beneath her boots. Some battles had to be entered under her own power. On the 14th floor, she studied the ceiling to steady herself until Marcus Calloway emerged and guided her into his sunlit office. They sat across from each other, the stakes thick in the quiet air. Claire began to speak. For 31 minutes, she laid out the plain anatomy of her life. She told him about the cafe, the contract, and the old building. She did not hide the divorce, Damon's attack through the press, or the federal shadow moving closer to Adriano. Then she played the recording from the cafe. Damon's voice, low and cold, saying break lines. Marta and Calloway in the same breath. Marcus stopped moving. Claire placed the timeline beside it, then showed him the video from Marta's window. This is not gossip, she said. This is the pattern. If he is charged, the project enters legal limbo. Marcus said, his voice lower now. Claire nodded, accepting the risk. But your designs exist independently of ownership. He added, another silence stretched between them. He brought up the article and its claim that her personal life had compromised her professional judgment. Claire's eyes stayed steady. My judgment is documented in every beam, joint and preservation choice I have made over the last 6 weeks, she said softly. Let your engineers examine it. Let your board question me directly. But do not let a man who threatened my friend become the expert on my character. Marcus sighed. His board would want to suspend her contract. I know, Claire said, her voice calm in the rising tide. What do you want me to tell them? Marcus asked. Tell them you hired me for my work, and my work has not changed. Tell them you heard the recording and saw the evidence. Do not protect me. Marcus, just make an informed decision. Marcus stared at her, then pressed his palms flat against the mahogany desk, as if making the decision physical. Give me 1 week, he said. Let the dust settle. I will not terminate you based on whispers. A silent thank you passed between them. Do not thank me yet, he warned. Bring me the most beautiful restoration this city has seen in 20 years. At 1:43 in the afternoon, Claire sat back in the quiet of the sedan and let exhaustion wash over her. Relief ached in her chest. But beneath it, clarity had taken root. She called Adriano. Calloway is holding, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He heard the recording. He saw the video. He needs 1 week. The line crackled before his low voice returned. I am working on it. I know, she said, her chest tightening. I need to talk to you when I get back. Not about Damon. Not about lawyers. About us. His answer was heavy with things unsaid. I will be here. Outside. Manhattan blurred along 67th Street. Once a truth was spoken. It could not be put away again. The car stopped, and Claire stepped into the crisp afternoon. She looked up at the limestone facade, at the damaged cornices that had survived 130 years of weather. The building was still wounded, but it was standing. So was she. Inside, Adriano waited in the silent hall, perfectly still. She stopped beneath the plastic-wrapped chandeliers. I know what you are going to say, he said softly. I have been waiting for you to be ready. She studied his worn face, the scar at his temple, and the devotion she had come to recognize over 6 weeks of quiet dinners. In his stillness was the promise of a man who had decided she was worth protecting, and whose resolve had never shifted. Adriano, she began, her voice trembling. Before she could continue, the heavy oak door burst open. One of Adriano's guards stood there, chest heaving, eyes wide with panic. He is here, the guard gasped. Not alone. 3 men at the service entrance. One is armed. Warmth drained from the room. Adriano's face froze into a mask. His hand moved inside his tailored jacket, and Claire understood with a sinking heart that he carried something far deadlier than a phone. She stepped in front of him before she could think. In that fleeting second, the romance of quiet dinners and silk-walled rooms shattered. What remained was the truth of Adriano's world. Hidden, dangerous, and absolute. Claire wanted to run, but her feet would not move. Go upstairs, Adriano ordered. No, she said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Tell me what is happening. He stared at her. The silence stretched tight between them. Damon is here to finish this, Adriano said softly, and he brought someone who knows how. Claire looked toward the service corridor she had measured the first week. Then we use the house, she said. It has only one narrow approach from that side. Claire's confession would have to wait. Adriano stood before her with his hand inside his jacket, his silhouette dark against the foyer light, while 3 shadows waited near the service door. Everything they had built now depended on the next few minutes. Then let us end it, Claire whispered. Outside, the narrow alley off 67th Street lay cold and forgotten. A stone passage she had mapped weeks earlier, without imagining it might become part of their survival. She grabbed the rolled floor plan from the console table and spread it against the wall. Here, she said, pointing. The old service bolt still works. The corridor will slow them. Claire remembered the layout with painful clarity. The narrow service corridor, the 7-foot ceiling, the cold stone floor, and the single dead bulb Elena had put on the maintenance list 2 weeks ago. Rias, Adriano's trusted man, spoke rapid, tense Italian into his phone. One word made Adriano's jaw tighten. When Claire asked what it meant, his eyes locked onto hers, and the truth landed hard. Damon had hired someone who worked with blades and accelerants. He wanted this to look like an unfortunate structural accident, not a human act of cruelty. Claire's mouth went dry. Then she pointed to the lower stairwell. There is a gas shutoff behind the old pantry. Cold dread settled in Claire's chest, touching an ancient human fear fire. He is going to burn it, she said, her voice shaking. Adriano's face stayed flat. Claire pictured the silk wall coverings upstairs, the Carrara marble, the cast iron posts that had survived 130 years. Then she remembered Elena on the second floor. Elena, she said, with terror rising in her eyes. Adriano barked an order, and Reyes ran for the stairs with his phone to his ear. Claire glanced toward the library, where 6 weeks of drawings and 15 years of hard-earned skill lay exposed. Then she pulled the fire alarm handle near the hall. For exactly 2 seconds, Claire hesitated. Then she let the drawings go. Paper could be rebuilt. People could not. What do you need from me? She asked. Adriano moved toward the door with compressed efficiency. Stay in the entrance hall. I am engaging the bolt from the outside. She stared at him. You are locking me in. His face softened. I am locking them out. The police were 4 minutes away. But he was heading for the service entrance. Claire grabbed the brass key from Elena's wall hook before he could stop her. Then I am not useless in here, she said. Go. Do not get hurt, she said, her voice breaking. Something unreadable crossed his face before he vanished through the door and engaged the century-old lock. Trapped inside the silent hall, Claire struggled to stay still. For 3 years of marriage, she had used work to outrun pain. Now 4 minutes felt endless. At 90 seconds, she heard them at the back of the house. Not voices, but quiet. Focused sounds of men trying not to be heard. Claire moved fast, locking the library, kicking a doorstop under the front hall door, and turning on every light in the corridor. If they wanted shadows, she would take them away. The cold stone carried muffled sounds from the struggle below. A low voice muttered in an unfamiliar tongue. Then came a heavy silence, followed by the terrible sound of flesh hitting stone. Bodies colliding in a cramped corridor. Then nothing. Claire stood frozen, with her fingers pressed against the locked door. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. One slow step after another. She raised the brass key like a weapon she knew was useless. The door opened, and Adriano stepped into the hall. His jacket was gone. A steady line of blood ran from a cut on his cheek. His eyes found the lights. The blocked door. The key in her hand. You stayed busy, he breathed. A dark stain spread across Adriano's ribs, promising pain that would deepen by morning. His chest rose and fell harshly, his breath broken by 4 brutal minutes in the corridor. He looked at Claire standing by the locked door, his face filled with emotions he had tried to bury. Are you hurt? She asked, keeping her voice steady. He winced and stepped closer, favoring his side. Ribs are not broken, he said through a breath. Reyes has 2 of them. The third, the one with the accelerant. Claire held up her phone. Not far, I sent Rachel the alarm time and the alley camera feed. Police have his direction. Claire crossed the 6 feet between them and rested her palm gently against the line of Adriano's jaw, careful to avoid the cut. Beneath her touch, he went completely still, the same way he had in the cafe when making a decision he could not take back. When he tried to speak, she softly told him not to manage this moment. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds, jaw tight. When he opened them, the mask was gone. For the first time, Claire saw a man who had set down a burden too heavy to keep carrying. I am not behind you, she whispered. I am here. He covered her hand with his I know. The magnificent, ruined house seemed to hold its breath around them. I love you, Claire said, speaking words she had not said in 4 years. Back then, the words had been hope dressed up as certainty. Now she knew the difference. This was not hope performing for someone else. This was truth. Plain and inevitable. Adriano looked at her and covered her hand with his rough one. Quietly, he admitted he had known for a long time. His love, he said, had begun the day. She spent 40 minutes lost on the servant staircase and then threatened to quit if anyone replaced it with something cheaper. A breathless sound escaped her. Adriano pulled her close, careful of his injured ribs, and she leaned against the shoulder of the most dangerous man she had ever known. Standing in the ruined hall, She thought of scars and the fragile things that somehow survive. Outside, sirens wailed. Less than a minute away. They stepped apart, creating the distance the coming hours would require. "It is going to be complicated," she said. "We have time," he murmured. Soon police filled the hall, followed by a detective 8 minutes later. Adriano's attorney arrived exactly 17 minutes after that, which surprised no one. Claire met the detective first and handed over her phone. Claire answered the police with the same precision she brought to every difficult truth. Across the hall, Adriano spoke with practiced calm, giving exactly what was required after 12 years of surviving this kind of danger. Downstairs, Reyes held 2 men whose futures had just collapsed, while the third was caught 3 blocks away with arson equipment. Claire gave the detective the cafe recording, the alarm time, the photo sent from Marta's building, the video from her window, the alley camera feed, and the blocked calls from Damon. She watched the detective's face change as Damon's recorded voice whispered about brake lines. For the first time, Claire saw disbelief turn into evidence. At 11:14 that night, Damon Vale was arrested at his Park Avenue apartment. Rachel Brenner called with the controlled excitement of a lawyer who knew the ground had changed. Conspiracy to commit arson. Conspiracy to commit assault. Witness intimidation. The captured third man had cooperated, but it was Claire's recording that closed the trap. "He is claiming it was taken in out of context," Rachel said. "Then play the part where he names Marta's address," Claire replied. Her voice surprised even her. It was calm, for one sharp second. She pictured Damon hearing his own words in a room he could not control. Then she finally breathed. "Handle all of it," Claire told Rachel. Placing the matter in her lawyer's hands, she sat in silence until midnight, when Elena entered with tea and set it down with her usual grace. "He will not let me near the cut on his face," Elena said, her eyes carrying the look of a woman who had managed this stubborn man for years. "He is in the library." After Elena left, Claire went downstairs. Adriano sat with his sleeves rolled up, staring at legal documents, his phone face down. Claire walked through the corridors she had spent 6 weeks learning and retrieved the first aid kit. Then she entered the library without knocking. She sat across from him in the library and opened the kit without asking. When he murmured that she did not have to do this, she ignored him gently and prepared the antiseptic. "Hold still," she whispered, and he obeyed. She cleaned the cut with careful hands, aware of his steady gaze on her face. When she asked about the warrant, he said his attorney believed it was manageable, though the coming months would require painful restructuring. "This will change your business," she said, "and my life," as she applied the final closure strips. He admitted he had wanted change for a long time. She smoothed the adhesive and stepped back. "The building was part of that?" she asked softly. Adriano looked at her and said he was 39 years old, and for 8 years he had run an empire he never chose because he was competent and knew nothing else. He told her about his grandfather's letter, which said the townhouse was the only family asset, not bought with money that had cost someone else their soul. "He wanted me to build something," Adriano said, "not just maintain a dynasty." Claire listened to the old stone breathing around them. "You cannot just walk away," she whispered. "No," he said. "Not immediately. But I can start cutting away what should never have been kept. It can be restructured," Adriano said. "The path to legitimacy would be long, but real." Claire let the words settle and faced them with the same honesty she had demanded all along. She would not soften the truth. She thought of her marriage. 3 years with a man who hid his nature, and compared it with Adriano, who had been frighteningly honest from the beginning. "Then I stay with the truth," she said, "not with excuses." Then she changed the subject to the servant staircase. She wanted to restore the 4th-floor landing next. Its ironwork had been hidden under boards since the 90s, waiting patiently to be seen again. She began packing the first aid kit. "I want to reach that section before the contractor finishes the south wing," Claire said, then paused and looked up. "I need to know you are committed to the whole building, not just the easy parts." Adriano met her eyes. "The whole building. I have said that from the beginning." His gaze was intense, but comforting now. The feeling of being seen completely by someone who refused to look away. I meant what I said in the hall, she whispered. He leaned closer. Claire, I have loved you since the servant staircase 6 weeks ago. The warrant. The investigation. None of it changes that. She believed him because he did not make it sound easy. The federal investigation. Dam and Vale. All of it changes nothing, Adriano said, his voice dropping. You are not a situation I am managing. You are not someone I protect because it is convenient. You are, he stopped, and his face softened into something real. Stripped of defense. You are the person I want to build something with, instead of merely maintaining what was handed to me. Claire looked at him while the library seemed to breathe around them. Okay, she said, then, because she had learned not to leave important things unsaid. She added, but we build it honestly. Or not at all. He reached across the desk and took her hand. Honestly, he promised. Justice did not move quickly. Claire watched the federal investigation stretch over 4 months, a cold institutional grind. Adriano's attorneys worked through long nights, restructuring businesses and shielding him from charges. Damon's fall came faster. Within 6 weeks, electronic evidence, witness statements, Claire's records, and the cafe recording forced him to surrender properties and freedom. At the hearing, Damon turned once and tried to catch her eye, wearing the same polished face he had used in the cafe. Claire did not look away. Rachel played the recording, and his smile died before the room. His sentence was shorter than it should have been, but his clean public mask was gone forever. On a biting Tuesday afternoon, Claire stood on the cold stone steps of a lower Manhattan courthouse. 14 minutes earlier, a judge pen had reduced years of shared promises to a single lifeless sheet of paper. Damon was led past her in a dark coat, wrist hidden beneath folded fabric, still trying to look untouchable. He paused just long enough to whisper her name. Claire turned. You do not get to say it anymore, she said, clear and calm. Then she walked past him to Marta, who stood beside her like an anchor, later over steaming mugs in a quiet cafe. Marta asked if she was going back to the old building. Claire nodded. Because I choose it. He is also a man whose darkness I understand, Claire said, her voice steady in the quiet cafe. I have always known who he is. This is not a surprise I am trying to manage. It is a truth I have looked at directly. She was no longer a woman living on foolish hope. She was a woman demanding reality, even when it was difficult. The Marcus Calloway project survived because she refused to let it die. By January, she stood in the restored East Wing, where original plaster and wood gleamed under her touch. Calloway walked the halls in silence, heavy with thought. When he finally spoke, his voice carried rare, genuine reverence. It was the finest restoration he had seen in 15 years. Standing on the frozen pavement, Claire pressed the phone to her ear while winter air stung her cheeks. On the other end, Adriano listened in a deep silence. It was not indifference. It was the quiet of a man who felt too much to answer quickly. I knew it would be, he finally said, his voice low. I did not need to see it. The tight knot in her chest loosened slightly. By spring, the townhouse had transformed, though it was still unfinished. Crews came and went. Dust lifted from old floors. New light entered rooms that had been closed for years. That felt right to Claire. True art could not be rushed. Neither could trust. Room by room, the old townhouse began to breathe again, but Claire no longer measured progress only in stone and wood. She measured it in mornings without fear, in Marta laughing in the kitchen, in Adriano leaving his phone outside the dining room because she had asked him to be present, in the entrance hall. The cracked marble was stabilized rather than replaced, its scars left visible and honest. When the chandeliers were lit, Elena stood beneath them with wet eyes. Claire ran her fingers over the restored servant staircase and smiled. Nothing perfect, nothing false. It reminded her of the life she had chosen to keep. One evening, as light filtered through the landing window and cast long shadows across the restored ironwork, Adriano found Claire sitting on the top step. He sat beside her, and the house settled around them in peaceful silence. For a long while, They said nothing. Do you remember your grandfather's letter? She whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. He wanted someone to make something, not just maintain things. Adriano stayed very still, his hand finding hers on the cold step. I think he would love what we are making, he said softly. Claire looked around the staircase, then back at him. Then let us keep making it, and let's never pretend it was easy. They married in October, almost exactly 1 year after the rainy morning in the cafe, on the restored rooftop terrace, with Manhattan spread out below them. 20 of their closest friends gathered in soft autumn sun. Claire stood tall in a dark, clean-lined dress and spoke her vows with the clarity of a woman who finally knew her own worth. Adriano answered with the steady gravity of a man who did not make promises lightly. High above the rushing city, the tragedies behind them seemed to soften in the warm air. They had learned what pain could teach without letting it define them. Betrayal had shattered one life. Trust chosen carefully had built another. Marta finally cried, though she pretended not to. Later they stood on the rooftop with drinks in hand, while the city glittered beneath them, like a living painting. Adriano looked out at the skyline with that familiar, unreadable expression of quiet reflection. He spoke of the building, of what it had been when Claire first arrived, and what they had rebuilt together. Claire reminded him that rebuilding always takes two. His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. Below them, Manhattan pulsed on, indifferent to their small victory, full of passing strangers in cafes and corner booths. Claire thought of the woman she had been at that corner table and wished she could tell her, keep breathing. Claire had come to that cafe only to sign divorce papers, and had left with a business card and a future she never could have imagined. She had set out to restore a historic building, but somewhere in the work, she had restored herself. That was the quiet secret of restoration. You begin by fixing what everyone can see, only to discover the foundation matters most. Looking over the vast city, Claire felt a calm courage rise in her. It was not blind hope. It was hard-earned strength. She was no longer afraid in the old way. Damon had taken years from her, but he had not taken her name, her work, or her right to choose who she became next. She knew Adriano carried a complex world she would spend years trying to understand. The path ahead would be difficult, but it would be honest. They stood together like survivors, no longer afraid in the same way, because they had already lived through the wreckage. Peace, Claire realized, did not come from pretending storms would never return. It came from knowing what to do when the sky darkened. Her hand rested on the cold October iron railing as she looked down at the city, feeling a sudden wave of gratitude. Let us go inside, she said softly. It is cold. In a minute, Adriano replied, his eyes moving across the Manhattan skyline. She waited beside him while the city hummed below. Neither of them looked back at the streets or the shadows they had left behind. They stood on the terrace side by side as the cold wind moved around them. In that quiet, fragile moment, they chose the uncertain future they were building together. Healing could not happen while they kept staring at the ruins of what broke them. Eventually, they had to lift their eyes and build again, beneath the wide New York sky. Claire let the silence settle inside her and made one last promise to herself. She would never again mistake fear for love, or survival for a life.